Chemjobber is one of chemistry's most read bloggers. Since 2008, CJ has amplified job postings to his readers and Twitter followers, identified trends in the chemical job market, and provided commentary on a range of practical issues of interest to chemists and chemical engineers. He has nearly 30,000 followers on Twitter, and he is the first resource to whom all or many of us in chemistry or chemistry-adjacent fields turned when we have found ourselves unemployed or looking for a new position. Since 2017, he has had a monthly column in Chemical and Engineering News, the primary trade publication of the American Chemical Society. I know I share the widely held sentiment that Chemjobber provides an enormous value to the community and does essentially all of it on his own time. Chemjobber, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for a very kind introduction, Darren. I'm really happy to be here.
What is the most surprising use of ethylene oxide gas?
I don't know, but the one that always that's right. There was something about sanitizing herbs, I think is what it was.
So, in addition to sanitizing surgical implements, apparently it also sanitizes cinnamon and bay leaves. That surprised. That was a something I learned recently from you.
I was really shocked, because it doesn't. Of course, it makes a lot of sense that the herbs that you get at the grocery store are going to be somehow treated, whatever that looks like, to make sure that they don't mold in your. It would be really interesting to know, Darren. Do you do any cooking? Are you?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. What do you think the oldest thing in your spice cabinet is?
Oh, that's crazy. Well, I have a couple of like mason jars full of cumin from the international market. Probably one of those is at least a decade old.
Yeah, I think my wife and I have things that are like from before we were married a while back. So yeah, it's and so you never really think about it, and that's the great thing about chemistry and chemicals is that they're really deeply embedded in places that you didn't even know.
How did you become interested in chemistry?
That's a great question. I had this very misguided notion that I still sometimes have that I wanted to be a physician, and I met this challenge of organic chemistry as a sophomore and did actually quite poorly the first time around, and then I ended up taking it again and really getting interested in it, and then meeting the professor of my class and asking him for a undergraduate position in his laboratory doing research, and did my first organometallic reaction, and it was gorgeous, formed this beautiful orange complex. And it's actually really funny that a graduate student, said to me, like, nothing you ever do will ever be this easy or beautiful. And it's really true that it's just, yeah. So that's the story.
Were your parents scientists?
My father was a lifetime electrical engineer, and very, very, very much an engineer. And so he formed my conception of engineering, which is that. So he was a utility engineer, and so it's very much about how the power gets from the substation to the customer, and just memories of my father sitting there with an engineering textbook and a green pad of graph paper and writing out his equations. And it really didn't appeal to me much. Even though it's very funny because I meet engineers now and they work at computers, or they, you know, engineering has just as it's seemingly as broad applications, if not broader than chemistry. And so you meet engineers who are primarily managers or primarily salespeople or primarily sometimes chemists, and I'm like, that's not real engineering. Of course, that's a very pejorative description, but my mom is a registered dietitian, or was a registered dietitian before she retired, and so uh, very much if I really think about it, very much a conception that like engineering and also biochemistry are kind of these two things that sort of core to life.
Some might argue that synthetic organic chemistry has some is similar to engineering philosophically. I don't know if you would agree with that conception, in the sense that you're sometimes trying to optimize something. You're almost always trying to build something. At the end of the day, you want to be able to put something in a bottle.
Right. I guess I'm a little bit. I'm sorry. I'm going to be a little too literal there, in the sense that engineers. So I believe there is actually a course taught for the kind of old-fashioned forms of engineering, the classic, like my father would say, like there are only four types of engineers: electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, civil engineering. Um, and well, one of the courses uh, is engineering economics, and so that's actually a really interesting aspect of what they do is that like they actually I've been working recently with an engineer who's 2 years, I suspect, out of college, and his comfort and familiarity with basic economic calculations is shocking to me. It's just standard Excel spreadsheet sort of, this is how much the raw materials cost. This is how much it's going to cost us to run the plant. And so I guess I kind of push back a little bit on that, because the parameter that chemists are optimizing for is almost never money. It's something else. It's yield, it's labor, and you can argue that as you scale up, it does equal money. But I just, I'm a little bit, it feels like, and I agree that the philosophical thing is almost always, well, if we do, you could do it this way, but that's not practical. Therefore, we have to try to either, I don't know, increase the turnover of the catalyst by changing its structure, or, uh, go this different synthetic route.
Yeah, interesting. I think we might touch on chemical engineering a little bit later. Um, how did you get your first job out of school?
I uh, as I was saying before, I had uh, a kind of misguided thought process about going to medical school, and was not successful with my applications, and so ended up seeing that there was a position available at uh, a town nearby where my college was, that where I was living at the time, was very attractive, because it's basically a vacation town that happened to have a small uh, pharmaceutical services firm there, and ended up working, answering the ad, which the ad was great because it basically said, like, we're looking for somebody who has a knowledge of chemistry, comfort in the laboratory, and a sense of humor. And I'm like, well, I could do that. And so I worked there for a year as an analytical chemist.
What sector do you work in?
I I work in what I call chemical manufacturing, which is a very boring, much more of an economic term than anything else. But what the sector that I really work in is called custom chemical manufacturing. So it's this, I work for uh, a custom manufacturing organization, and it is an organization that manufactures chemicals to order for the customer.
How well did your undergraduate or PhD training prepare you for your current position?
It prepared me pretty well, in the sense that at the guts of the problems that I deal with are either engineering things, which I've fundamentally, or plant related equipment issues or regulatory problems. And these are all the things that I don't have any expertise in and have just learned on the job. And then the other aspect of it has almost always been chemical. It's either a synthetic problem or it's an analytical problem. I feel very prepared because every time it seems like once a day or once a week, I will remember some fact that I learned in graduate school or undergraduate, or some thought process that I learned. And then past that, it's the literature knowledge. It's the realization that if you don't know, probably your PI knows. If your PI doesn't know, probably there's somebody down the hall who knows. Somebody knows, has published it, and you haven't found it yet.
What journals have you found to be the most useful in your line of work?
The journal that I like reading the most, and probably regrettably now the only journal that I read with any regularity, is Organic Process Research and Development. Um, it's a really interesting one, and I think a really nice platform and showcase for the varying synthetic work that's going on in the pharmaceutical industry.
How would you characterize the connectivity between organic synthetic chemistry, process chemistry, and chemical engineering? In what ways do you interact in your job?
Our job is within synthetic organic chemistry is to do things that are at large scale. So my organization fundamentally won't talk to you as a customer if your order is less than 20 kilos. So that's 42 pounds, or 44 pounds, excuse me. So that's a bag of flour. That's a 50-pound bag of flour. If you won't commit to ordering that amount, which must cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, if you won't commit to ordering that amount for 3 years, we won't talk to you. Sorry, I got off on a little bit of a tangent there.
Oh, not at
Um,
all.
um, so the process chemistry aspect of this is that what we need to do needs to be safe. It needs to be robust. It needs to be robust in the sense that the reaction parameters need to be wide, not narrow. In the plant, you don't have the control of everything that you necessarily do at 100 milliliter scale. It needs to be reproducible in the sense that uh, the failure of a single reaction in the laboratory is disappointing, but not the end of the world. The failure of a single batch in the plant uh, is a direct harm to the organization from a monetary perspective.
In terms of synthetic complexity, what sorts of molecular weights um, are we talking about? If I'm going to order 20 kilos of something, or much more than that, how many synthetic steps? How many stereocenters? What sorts of compounds are we talking about?
My answer to that question, and I've been in many customer meetings, my answer to that question is it depends. It depends on how difficult it is. If you're buying all the stereo centers, you can have as many stereo centers as you like. Uh, if the reaction to set the stereo centers is very simple and repeatable and scalable, that it doesn't matter. If it's something that's going to sit at minus 20 degrees for 48 hours uh, in our facility, that's that's time that we have to pay an operator to be there. That's time that we have to pay the analytical chemist to prepare to do all the QC work on the solvents and the materials going into the reactor. That's time that we have to pay a process chemist to oversee the chemistry that's going on inside the reactor. That is expensive.
Sure.
And so that's the sort of thing that will run you. In terms of molecular weight, I've worked with things that are well into the low thousands.
I think a lot of younger chemists who may be listening to this will wonder how their careers will evolve over time. So, starting with an entry level position, what sorts of both scientific and managerial responsibilities come your way?
Yeah, that's actually really interesting and something that has been a huge attempted focus of my social media work and kind of the stuff that goes on behind the scenes is really trying to understand it at a statistical level. Broadly speaking, I think, but one of the core things that drives my thinking about how I talk about chemical employment is that we chemists would and engineers would never accept single anecdotes for as viable explanations for chemical phenomena or processes or anything like that. You wouldn't say, well, I have a friend who ran that reaction once and it worked pretty well. That's not science. It's the beginning of science, but it's not science. But we're very willing to have our perceptions of employment in our field basically run anecdotally and say, well, most of my professor's students have gone on to jobs, therefore this is fine. And you know what? It is fine for the most part. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. And attempting to bring some social science into chemical employment is really what I try to do on a regular basis. And I don't feel that I'm particularly successful at it, but that is the primary lens that I use. So I'm going to go back and answer your question, which is that, like, I don't know what the traditional path is. Some people would burst into our conversation here and say, "Oh, there is no traditional path." And my answer to that is, uh, uh, let's try to get some numbers here. And the problem, of course, is that we don't really have any good cohort analysis of what happens. Broadly speaking, chemists, PhD chemists who enter industry traditionally start entry level positions are at the bench. I don't know how many entry level positions start at the bench, while some of them start somewhere else within the company, behind a computer. I do know that the very basic sales positions in our industry can sometimes take somebody who's basically a fresh graduate student, and have them do the functions of sales. They send them to some kind of a course where they teach them, this is how you do scientific equipment sales or scientific services sales, and then from that point on, it's a sales process or regulatory or what have you. Eventually, at some point, you'll be offered the opportunity to become a supervisor of and mentor to younger scientists. And then at some point, you'll be a leader of scientists, if that is something. And then oftentimes there's at your very large companies, there's a research management track, and then there's a business management track. And I am speaking a little bit out of turn here. I believe the old traditional chemical manufacturers, the Dows and DuPonts of the world, had a very clear pathway and also kind of a set professional development system. And I think that for the old traditional pharmaceutical companies, there is somewhat less of a structured system, although there are tracks. And then for your newer biotech companies, I'm going to guess it's an echo of the large ones that are different in their whatever company dependent ways.
Why did you start Chemjobber?
I started Chemjobber because it frustrated me that I had no idea what the job market looked like. I just knew that the back pages of CNN that had the jobs seemed to be emptier in November of 2008 or October of 2008. And the lack of quantitative data really bothered me. Econometrics, the measurement of the economy, economics is a lot about psychology and feeling, right? Money is sort of a weird concept. It's not really. It's just like it's a store of value, and because there's this green cloth in your wallet and you pull it out, and it has a picture of George Washington or Harriet Tubman on there. Um, you say, this has value. Um, that's a feeling. But jobs are things that people need, and there should be numbers attached to them. And so that's what I really wanted to do. And then from there, I started to tackle things that I wanted to write about. I wanted to write about Sherry Sanji and her death in a laboratory incident at UCLA. I wanted to write about um, work-life balance and mental health and how I sort of made it through graduate school with okay mental health, not definitely not great, and I felt like nobody else was talking about it.
In 2008, you were part of I don't know if you viewed it this way, but a cohort with Derek Lowe and Paul Brocker, of these chemistry bloggers that were the talk of water coolers and break rooms in chemistry graduate departments. Did you did you feel this that you were part of a movement at the time, or how did you view that?
Oh, of course. Although I would consider myself essentially of the third wave, right? Derek is always the first, and then there were a lot of people who came within science broadly, and chemistry in particular. I would say Dylan Stiles is probably the one that kind of did what everybody else is doing, while Derek has just been Derek. Um, and then Dylan Stiles with Tender Button, and then I think it was I would say it was Paul with Chembark, who kind of like this is what Chemjobber is not that different than Chembark, although Paul is a much more comprehensive and better thinker than I am. And then there was the Chemblog with Kyle Finch Sigbati, um, that kind of came around, and so the interplay between those, the Derricks and the Pauls and the Chemblog kind of birthed Chemjobber. Uh, and so I would say I am a third wave chemistry blogger, although 12 years later, Paul blogs occasionally, and the Chem blog is
Mm-hmm. It was fun to be at least adjacent to the development of chemistry blogging, as Paul sat so close to me in graduate school that our chairs touched in the back. And people had to ask us to like scoot our chairs in to get through, because of course the desks were in the lab back when they designed organic chemistry labs to have that arrangement. How do you have time to be Chemjobber in addition to your job responsibilities? Or how do you make time? It seems unbelievable to us, the field.
I make time by making time. It's definitely something that's always in the margins. So, uh, Twitter, blogging is hard now in modern times, because you have to, like, or I can't blog on a phone. You have to sit down, and you have to sit down at the computer, and you have to write 50 or 100 words or 200 words, or, if you're really getting rocking. 400 or 500 words. And so I do that at home on my computer, and I schedule posts to pop up at 6 a.m. on Eastern time. Twitter, it's just easier because I was very late to the smartphone revolution, but I have one now.
Well, you have quite a following on Twitter now.
Yeah, I really think that that's just an aspect of being on Twitter for 10 years.
And posting content that people are interested in and affects them. Why do you prefer to be anonymous?
I prefer to be anonymous because it offers me some level of freedom to, and it's something that I'm not. It is a privilege and it's a responsibility. It allows me to speak more freely. It allows me to put a really bright line between my professional life and my personal life. And it's a responsibility in that, I should not use that irresponsibly. I try not to write things that I would not say to someone's face. It's a responsibility in that it gives me some freedom to comment on institutions and systems that need to change because of things that are not fair or not just.
In retrospect, part of me wishes that I could have started molecular podcasting anonymously because there are some things that is hard to say as a tenured faculty member at a major research institution.
Right.
What are some of the most prominent ways in which the COVID-19 pandemic has affected the chemical job market?
So embarrassingly, I am on deadline for a column about this. I would say that the most prominent way that it's affected things is that it's obviously going. It has had both immediate and long-term effects on academic employment. So the chemical industry, in general, the pharmaceutical industry seems to be doing just fine. The old time or the core chemical manufacturing, I think, is more impacted. So if you think about if you're a maker of polymers that end up, especially polymers that are extraordinarily fire resistant for aircrafts, you are in a bad place right now because ain't nobody buying a brand new plane anytime soon. And so that's really bad. Oil and gas. I don't know if you've watched how little you've commuted this year, but people stopped using the products of the oil and gas industry to get themselves to work this year, and that's going to have an impact.
Yeah, and in
And
my case, I also made a vanity purchase of a plug-in hybrid, so
right,
I've even compounded the problem for
right,
them.
right, right. It'd be even better, I guess, if you had gone from like an F-350 to a plug-in hybrid. Um, but so that's the industry side of things. That's my viewpoint of it. It may be correct and maybe not correct, but that's the way I see it. I should put in a comment about government, which also folds into the academic problem. So the most immediate impact that I see is that hiring for the 2020 2021 fall hiring cycle. So this is 4 assistant professor positions with a start date of August 1st or September 1st, or July 1st, more likely, 2021. Those are about 40% of where we would expect them to be. And that is a major impact. If you think about the ripple effects that's going to have when over half of the positions that you would normally expect to be there disappear. This is based off of my work with Andrew Spaeth on the chemistry faculty jobs list. And So that's going to have ripple effects, right? You have um, 350 tenure track faculty that would have been hired but will not be hired now. So that means that there are 350 postdoctoral positions that are going to continue into 2021 and 2022. That's going to have an impact on think about the economic impact of that, right? That means that the money wrapped up in startup packages will not flow, um, and that's basically direct connection to the broader chemical enterprise and ultimately the national economy or the world economy as a whole. Um, the we also don't really have a full picture of how this has affected universities and higher education as a whole, especially because higher education is one of the fields that seems to be impacted the most, both by the shutdown itself, um, and also it's just not really clear to me, and I don't I confess I haven't looked at what revenue numbers look like for private universities or flagship state universities and the like. But with a lower economy, that means somewhat less money into state and local coffers, which means ultimately lower support for higher education, public higher education. So all of that, it seems to me, doesn't bode well for 2021 or 2022. Um,
That's
may
interesting. I hadn't even considered the extension of current postdoctoral positions as a result of 350 people who are not on the faculty job market, or who maybe are, but because of the limitations in the number of positions, that will put stress on university laboratories and their grant sources to try to find a way to continue to pay these salaries. That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and hey, maybe I'm so let's take those 350 people. Um, Presumably many of them are industry eligible and or would be willing to, if circumstances dictated, to take a position in industry. Um,
It,
that some percentage of them might do so. So let's say it's 100 people, it's still 200 who are kind of left in limbo. And then there's an impact to PIs and presumably that's stress on funding agencies as well. So um, there's it's a non-trivial ripple effect.
are there any silver linings in the chemical industry vis-a-vis COVID-19? For example, expansion of non-wovens for masks, PPE,
Right,
but
right,
even, RNA vaccines or
right,
viral
right.
vector vaccines.
So I fundamentally don't know. I think so. Let's take Pfizer as an example. I don't. It would be really interesting to understand what. Okay, so I'm gonna try to work backwards here. Um, I'm sure that if you're a manufacturer of melt blown polypropylene strands, like business is great. Um, But the problem is that all your other business, right? You don't just make PPE. Like 3M is actually, the last I saw, not doing so great, right? Because their whole business is not really making PPE. Their whole business is the rest of the economy, which is this thing that is really difficult for everybody to understand, that until we cannot live with the virus and have a normal bustling economy. Um, and it gets back to economics as feeling. I do not uh, family members who have medical conditions, and I think it's pretty safe to say that uh, underlying conditions for COVID-19 are quite broad. It's not just one particular syndrome that people have to worry about. It's large swaths of the population cannot participate fully in life. Therefore, they cannot participate fully in the economy. So until we uh, get everybody vaccinated, we're not going to have a quote unquote normal economy. Um,
One thing that's struck me about your most recent posts is the extent to which losses in the oil and gas industry have affected the overall prospects of hiring in the chemical industry. And I think it surprises some university students that oil and gas is so, I mean, in retrospect, it seems obvious that it would hire most chemists and chemical engineers, but a lot of the faculty members come from they have never worked in the oil and gas industry. They've never worked in chemical manufacturing. And do you think that departments underrate the extent to which oil and gas jobs dominate the chemical industry? And do you think something should be done about that?
I'm not sure that, for example, oil and gas industry employment of chemists in particular is a enormous driver of chemical employment of, quote unquote, chemists. At the same time, I think that you're right. It is the ultimate impact of kind of every aspect of the economy that we, you know, uh, I think on a broad political level, we sort of say, yes, gas prices are very important to the economy, but we don't really kind of understand that the deeply uh, complex and networked nature of that. It's also a weird aspect of chemical manufacturing that kind of, and I say that in its most broad sense, right? That uh, um, that it's basically any company that makes something from chemicals, which is, uh, it will be interesting to see so what I was going to say about Pfizer is that, we all think Pfizer's going to make $1 bajillion because it is the manufacturer of the vaccine. And I don't know about you, but like the number that I can come up off the top of my head, which if I were to be offered the vaccine and have an ability to know that it would not, by giving it to me now, I would not be harming somebody else who should take my place in line. Like that number of like, I would pay this amount is very, very high. It's, probably the largest discretionary purchase I would ever make. It's the rest of Pfizer's portfolio that we don't really know, or well, I suspect they're a public company. We do know, but right, like doctors' offices, they closed. Elective medical procedures, they didn't happen. My gosh, it's even impacting like cancer treatment, which you would think is fundamentally something that the COVID that you would think would continue through a pandemic, but that's still being affected. I guess what I'm really saying is that you would think the pharma companies are doing really great, and for the most part, we don't have evidence that they're doing poorly, but it's just the rest of the economy that's not doing so great. And I think that probably is having immediate impact, and then probably will have a long-term impact on the economy. And then this is one of the core things that I think is really difficult to understand about chemical employment versus the rest of the economy is that chemical employment is pro-cyclical. When the economy is doing well, chemists are doing well, and vice versa. If the economy is poor, like it was during the Great Recession, chemists didn't do so well, and that's that's a really difficult aspect of all of this.
Sure. Do you think that that some economics training, maybe some finance? You mentioned that your younger colleagues in engineering have a good handle on how to run a spreadsheet, how to do an NPV calculation. Do you think any of this training is useful for chemists? And I guess you could answer that question, but more broadly, is there anything you would add or change about the undergraduate chemistry curriculum?
I'm always kind of curious as to like how much business should a chemist learn? Are we saying like let's let's bound this discussion? Are we saying PhD chemists should get out of graduate school with an MBA? No, we're not. Are we saying that they should take a year-long business course? No, probably not. If you had like a 1 month short course, maybe, uh, you know, like a 1 week seminar, that would probably cover everything. Like you say, NPV. So I'm not an engineer. I believe NPV stands for net present value. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So that's basically a calculation of how much something in the future is worth to you now. That if I promised you $1 on December 31st, 2022, what is your discount? Would you be willing, if your choice was $1 in 2022 or 25 cents today, which would you take? And it depends on, feelings and also math. If the answer was $1,000 in 2022 or a quarter today, you would take the $1,000. But I think it would be valuable. I think it would help scientists or professional chemists, which is what I kind of consider graduate school to be about. I think it would help them understand why the business people make decisions the way they make them. What are their parameters? What are their bounds? We all know that Professor Smith, she cannot buy 5 more HPLCs because she didn't get that R01 that she was looking for. And that's a parameter that everybody sort of says, oh, okay, I get it. But when the stock price for the company drops by a quarter, nobody, it's really not clear to the average scientist, like, hey guys, why are you laying off 10% of us or 5% of us or whatever? Like, don't you have a savings account somewhere that you could like pull out to like fund R&D? And people just, and I'm not saying that the business people are always right or whatever. I'm just saying that like whatever cold rational calculations you're making, scientists tend not to understand them when they're at that scale. For the undergraduates, I'm not really sure. Like, undergraduate chemistry, in my opinion, and I'm no chemical educator, should be about understanding the breadth and depth and width of chemistry, and not even the full depth. Just know that like when you drop the penny into the well, like you're not going to hear a sound for a long time.
I have a few final questions about your role as a blogger and as somebody who is a frequent contributor to social media. What is your favorite medium? Now you have blogging, the CNE column, and Twitter. And which do you enjoy the most?
I think over the years, I've gotten more interested in interacting with people, and Twitter is a really fun place to do that. So, the problem with Twitter chemistry, the great thing about chemistry Twitter is that it is great. The bad thing about chemistry Twitter is that it exists in the real world and the real world of Twitter. And of course, the real world of Twitter for the last 4 years. That's the sort of that's the sort of negative aspect of Twitter. But yeah, I like it a lot. The blog is great. I still uh, work on it and think that, it is a craft that I have yet to master.
I may be wrong about this, but I don't think you tweet out too many of your posts. Is there a reason for that, or maybe I'm completely wrong?
There was a period of time where I would tweet out my posts twice a day, and it just started to feel like work. And the audiences between Twitter and the blog seemed to diverge, and so then it didn't begin to matter. I think that if I do really like, one of the great things, like, the people who do like uh uh 20 tweet threads, right? They should get a blog. Nobody's going to sit there and read your 400 word essay, 280 characters at a time, unless you're like uh you know a government official or something like that. And even then, you don't do that. What you do is you tweet a picture, which is the worst, of your 400 words. um and it's just, yeah, I mean, in that sense, blogging is a much better medium.
When I bought
But
my, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
and yeah, so for a while there I would do it. And once it's gotten down to like once every 3 months I'll tweet one of my posts.
Does the duck have a name?
Yes, technically it is called the Duck of Sabotage, because uh I attempted to give this duck away a long time ago by uh running a post about laboratory sabotage and whether or not it actually happened, because it's very much a friend of a friend sort of conversation amongst graduate students, that you heard the story about some other lab where somebody did something awful to somebody else's experiment.
I see now that it's sitting in front of you that the duck is much more massive than I had envisioned it from your Twitter avatar.
It's really enormous. I mean, it's this huge thing. And initially I wanted it out of my house, right? But now, of course, it's 10 years old and 12 years
It's
old,
also a
10
much
years
more
old.
high, it's a much higher modulus material than I was expecting.
Yes, yes, yes. For a while there was a kind of a boring Twitter inside joke that it's a ceramic duck. Uh,
Just quickly to wrap up, are you working on site or remotely?
a little bit of both, but mostly on site with a mask and being as socially distanced as possible.
As a chemist, which COVID vaccine candidate excites you the most, and which would you take?
So obviously, you want the most effective one, but I have I will take the first one that I can get. I don't. I mean, okay, that's not true. I will say, as me, a logistics nerd, the the Pfizer vaccine with its redonkulous logistics cold chain is just like, this is the best, right? I mean, this is the sort of stuff that it kind of represents the ridiculous ability of American logistics networks to be able to do this sort of thing, that we're going to design this box, and this box is going to need 23 kilos of dry ice every 24 hours. Like, can we do it? And the answer is yes, we can do it.
And
And
it's yeah, go ahead.
it's just completely like, and then like, it's funny because like it's the whole like urban legend about Americans designing a pen that works in space upside down while the Russians use a pencil, which of course is an urban legend, but like really kind of deeply appeals to like the outlandish science and engineering nerd in me, I guess.
The interesting thing is what a chemical or molecular engineering problem it is, because genetically it's probably very similar to the Moderna vaccine, but there's something about the lipid formulation that is different. For the record, I'm a participant in the AstraZeneca Oxford trial, and I was a little bit disappointed to know that they didn't realize that the half dose, full dose regimen was more effective before they designed the study in the
Oh
US.
no.
So I got, assuming I got it, but I don't think the adverse reaction that I had was psychosomatic, but who knows? It could have been. So maybe there's a 62% likelihood that that I'm protected.
Right, right. Have you heard the rumors that people on online are uh beginning to, like, clinical trial patients are basically comparing symptoms or adverse reactions and saying, like, I think I received, active material versus, like, I think I received placebo.
I haven't seen that specifically, but I would be shocked if fewer than 60% of participants in a 50-50 RCT or said that they got the placebo. I'd imagine that because of psychosomatics, most of them have made up all kinds of symptoms, because you're inclined to believe that you got it, but
Yep, 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 yep. Yeah. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens when everything's unblinded.
CJ, you've been really generous with your time. Is there anything you wish I'd asked but didn't?
No, no, this was really wide ranging and incredible honor. Thank you very much, Darren.